How are you doing? It's Martin from Gardens for Life. In this video I'm going to show you an interesting technique called canopy gardening, in which you can actually effectively block the sunlight to the ground or to your garden beds. Basically reduce the weeds to next to nothing anyway. And I do have to admit, in this garden that I gave you guys an update of probably about 6 to 8 weeks ago, there is actually a lot of weeds growing in it. Even though there is no dig in lasagna gardening, I have to admit I did actually turn my eye over here and on other gardening projects for a few weeks, and as it turns out I did actually make a couple of mistakes which I don't mind actually admitting in public. And I certainly want you guys to benefit from us having made mistakes. We all do, and we want to learn from those mistakes as well and not repeat them. And hopefully you guys can take advantage of that. I want to show you this garden now. As you can see, things have really taken off here. Here is broccoli, potatoes. This is a different variety of potatoes. And we have some ullucus and broad beans and loads of oca. Here's some tiger nuts and two more varieties of oca. I just removed these wonderful crop of radish, long white icicles, from this bed, and there was actually some rocket salad in between, which I'm keeping. Unfortunately, the radish has gone to seed, so it's not really worth eating. It's kind of woody. These are a couple of courgette plants and some yacon plants. So all of this area here basically was kind of overrun with weeds, which I'll show you over here. Now, it wasn't quite as bad as this, but you can see here it is quite a few little weeds actually starting. Luckily enough, they're actually mostly superficially rooted, so you can see here you can very easily pull them up without the use of garden tools, even the old ducks. So the main advantage with no-dig gardening is that you normally should not get any weeds, but of course the main mistake I made was actually to use old wood chips that were left out in the middle of seeding grasses since last summer, and unfortunately there was a lot of weed seeds in the wood chips which I used to put on the paths on this new garden. So I will try to make sure either to cover piles of wood chips, especially in late summer when the grasses are seeding, but also to use fresh wood chips wherever possible. Now, Charles Dowding does recommend to use older wood chips. I don't know exactly why, but fresh wood chips will actually last a little longer as well. So in my experience, they seem to last for about 1 to 2 years, but then after 2 years you should actually replenish them a little bit, at least using a bucket, which I have done here, but I will in a minute once I get more wood chips delivered here. So on the beds themselves, you can also see there's quite a few weeds, mostly because of the grasses actually having grown up here, and I did not actually mow all of this. You can see I've been trying my best to actually keep the grass down, but also along this shelter belt over here, there is grasses actually going to seed, and certainly some of them will blow over here. But we're okay. It only takes about maybe an hour to 2 hours to weed all of this. And this is actually 14 beds, 4 meters average in length, and really quite productive. I want to show you how few weeds there is actually in between these plants here. For example, here, of course, there is no sunlight getting down to the ground between the plants, so you can see there is no chance of weeds actually popping up between ochas, for example. I want to show you guys the paths as well. This is a 1 meter wide strip of plastic that I put down. So the grass actually does grow as far as here over onto the plastic, and it'll take over the place eventually, so you have to kind of keep it back and cut it. Just here, look at how the roots are trying to grow. If you had wood chips here now, the roots of the grasses actually might grow into the wood chips, but that's why I would always highly recommend to have a bit of extra plastic and put it up like this, maybe about 10-15 centimeters worth, and then keep the grass cut on this side. And we usually use a barrier, whatever we have, like usually field stones or rocks is what we use, and you could use the likes of railway sleepers or even wood to keep it separate, but we don't bother. Let me just show you here in the woodchip garden, or Woodchip Island I should call it. It's very colourful now at the moment. I'll give you guys a tour of this now very shortly. It's actually doing very well. So here you can see we have some plastic here too, just on the edge, just a little bit as a pat more. We can remove the plastic after a while, but here you can see the grasses are kind of growing onto the wood chips, and you can always put the plastic up a little bit, and in order to keep it up like this, I would simply take a few wood chips and put them on the other side, just like that. And then you can actually kind of, if you keep mowing over this now, and you put a few wood chips on this side, it'll actually take care of it. As you can see, once you cover the entire garden with mulch like this garden is, the weeds are no longer a problem at all, because weed seeds simply land on top of the soil or of the wood chips, and they do not germinate. They don't even have a chance to get going. Look at that. Isn't that a lovely hollyhock? The size of the flower. And how many more flowers there's actually coming on. So yeah, I'm just going to show you how few weeds there is actually between the broccolis and the potatoes, and the broad beans too. I mean, take a look here. I mean, this is on the pat now. Very little space for a pat here, I know, but it's okay. As long as we're doing canopy gardening, there is actually no space for weeds basically, and hardly any sunlight coming through. So here you can see there's a nettle now, but that'll be easy to pull up, and it's actually kind of just very stringy and not a very strong plant, superficially rooted too, because it's actually very loose compost underneath here. We don't actually walk on the paths, we don't actually walk on the beds where the vegetables are growing, so not to compact it. And here you can see there's certainly a couple. Geez, look at that, there's potatoes actually being exposed now. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so here you can see even between the broad beans there is not a chance of actually any light getting down through. Hopefully we're going to get some broad beans actually. So the important thing is to always keep on top of the weeds and don't let them take over the place over here in this area. So I'm going to have to pay the price now and spend about a half an hour weeding this. But I believe once it's done, it should be okay. I think it's mostly down to the fact that this bit of ground actually still needs to be reclaimed basically. We're still trying to tame nature here, and we're also working with it at the same time, but the plants that have been there before obviously are still sometimes coming through, and we're depleting their resources by simply pulling them up time and time again. After a few months now, we've actually managed to take control of the ferns, and they're hardly coming up at all anymore now. So I believe we've been over the worst of it. They only take about 5 minutes to weed any of the perennial weeds that kind of pop through the 25 centimeters of compost that we put down, and the cardboard of course as well. But the grass seeds are something that you need to take care of, and always make sure that you actually mow the grass beside your garden and make sure that there is no grasses and weeds going to seed anywhere near your garden, in particular on the side where the prevailing winds are, especially in Ireland. Of course, it'd be the west side or the southwest. That's where the hurricane winds are coming from too. And I would suggest always staying on top of the weeds so that they don't get a chance to take off in the first place. So yeah, this is just a quick video, not so much editing involved, hopefully. And hopefully you enjoyed it, and give us a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Thanks a million. Bye bye. All the best. Oh man, that's the most weeding I've done in the last 3 years combined. So that took about 2 hours to weed all this behind me. So that's 14 beds and the paths in between. Not too bad considering, but I'll certainly be keeping an eye on them in the future, and I'll try not to repeat my mistakes. So basically I'm going to make sure that the edges are all kept clean, like Richard Perkins always says, and I'll try to make sure that the wind doesn't blow any grass seeds in from a distance as well. We'll have to mulch that shelter belt so that we don't have that issue next year, but we'll get it done probably sometime in the winter now, when the grass has kind of receded a little bit. And of course I will not be using old wood chips again that have been left there openly, especially throughout the late summer.